So, when you think about general education and when you think about an educated person, what kind of qualities does the person have?
To me, an educated person is a person of wisdom, a person of life experience, a person with empathy. I feel like without those human qualities, I don't think you're an educated person.
Being a teacher in different countries is definitely a different experience. How does it feel to be a teacher in India?
I don't necessarily completely agree with where the modern education is taking the next generation, but I also don't want to look back into the past and say that was completely okay. I'd be somewhere in the middle. I think we can learn from both the past and the present, and hopefully we can guide the future generation accordingly.
Hello, Tasal.
Hi, Paulis.
Hey, where are you at now?
I'm in a city called Mussoorie in the Himalayas.
Okay. And for those who might yet not know who Tesal is, so Tesal is an English teacher from India residing in the state of Meghalaya, which is not the same word as Himalaya, oddly enough. So we were just discussing the differences between these two words. So Tesal, could you please remind me and also the audience, what's the difference between the words Meghalaya and the word Himalaya?
Yeah, I think they should be pronounced the same way. Himalaya and Meghalaya, they're both derived from Sanskrit. Um, so Himalaya means abode of snow, and Meghalaya means abode of clouds. Um, and Meghalaya is where I'm from, and Himalaya is where I'm currently at.
Ah, right. Very good. Very good. And today, I and Tasal will speak a lot about Indian languages. We'll speak a lot about English as well. And likewise, we'll speak about the Garo people. And yeah, so maybe let's begin with that. So, who are the Garo people, Tasal?
So, Garo people, um, like Paul has mentioned, is an ethnic minority group of people residing in northeast India in a region in Meghalaya called Garo Hills.
And what kind of language do you guys speak?
So we speak Garo. In my language, we call it Atsku. So Garo is from Sino-Tibetan language family. It's from the Tibeto-Burman sub-branch of that family. Um, I think the closest language that I can think of that's similar to Garo would be Bodo, which is spoken in Assam.
And when you compare your language with other Northeast Indian languages, is it very unique? Like, could a person that don't know any of these languages spot that there's a difference?
Yes, they would be able to spot a lot of differences phonologically mostly. Um, I would say syntactically as well. Although many languages in Northeast India are related to each other, they're mutually incomprehensible, so we can't understand what the other person is saying. I mean, someone who's speaking another language from the Northeast.
And in general, how many different kind of language families are there in India? Because predominantly, let's say in Europe, you will find the Indo-European branch and the Finno-Ugric branch mainly, right?
Mm.
There's two in the whole continent. What about India?
Well, you do find Indo-European languages in India as well. I think the languages, the Indo-European languages, are mostly spoken in North India. They're from the Indo-Aryan sub-branch of the family. There are four major um, language families you can find in India. So one is Indo-European. We've got Sino-Tibetan. We have the Tibeto-Burman branch of the Sino-Tibetan family here. We've got Austroasiatic, and then we have the Dravidian languages, which are spoken in South India.
So, knowing how many different languages and language branches there are in India? Because I don't know the exact number of different languages in India, but I know it's a big number, definitely in the hundreds. So, how do people communicate between each other? Because if every region has their own language, or that most of the time is not even comprehensible, how do you guys talk to each other? Let's say a person from the north to the person in the west or in the south or maybe in the center.
I would say two main lingua francas. So English and Hindi. I'm more familiar with English, but in North India it would be Hindi. In South India, I think they would use English to communicate with each other, people speaking different South Indian languages, but you would also hear Hindi being spoken in South India too, and also in Northeast India to some extent. Yeah.
So, when you think about the lingua franca of the Middle East or of Africa, maybe Arabic would come to mind. If you think about Europe, maybe it's going to be English for the current, at least, era. When you think about India, though, Hindi would come to your mind to the people that don't know much about the Indian
Mm,
languages. But of course, it's much more complex just because the country is called India and the language is called Hindi doesn't
mm.
mean that it's the lingua franca of the region in general. So, how come it did not become the lingua franca that everyone knows, like, let's say, Arabic is?
I think India is quite diverse ethnically and linguistically, and that adds complexity to the political linguistic system here in India. Um, Promoting one Indian language as the dominant or as the main language of India would be a risk because I think that has the potential to break the country up, if I may say so. Um, I know English is spoken because of our colonial past, but that's the neutral language that I can think of that doesn't really belong to anybody, but at the same time belongs to everybody in India. Um, and as a result, I would personally consider English as the neutral language for India. Hindi would divide a lot of people, um,
Mhm.
divide a lot of regions in India.
Right. And Hindi, as I understand, is also comes from the Indo-European language branch, just like Sanskrit. And I believe like a
Hmm.
Sanskrit speaker should understand Hindi and vice versa. Whereas, well, not totally, but to an extent. Whereas if we take languages like Tamil, Tamil is a Dravidian language, so it's
Mm.
from a completely different language branch, and it's many people say that it's native to India, whereas there are a lot of debates if Sanskrit is native, and just because I had a couple of videos out comparing Lithuanian and Sanskrit, and they seem to get quite a lot of attention. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, in the comments, it was not much discussion about that, but more of what is the mother of all languages in India? Is it Tamil? Is it Sanskrit? So it seems like it's a very hot and politically activated topic. So why are there so many conflicts when it comes to Sanskrit and Tamil? I wouldn't have known this if not for the comments under the videos. What's happening there?
Uh, I think both languages are considered classical languages in India, Sanskrit and Tamil. Um, I mean, a lot of Indian languages have borrowings from Sanskrit, definitely. Like my state, Meghalaya, the name was derived from Sanskrit, although um, no one in my state speaks Sanskrit-based languages.
Mhm.
Tamil too is not a Sanskrit-based language, although it has a lot of borrowings from Sanskrit. I would say the relationship between Hindi and Sanskrit would be more or less um, like Latin and Italian, for example.
Mhm. Mhm. Gotcha.
So if you can consider Latin the native language of Italy, then I think Sanskrit could be considered native. language of India, although I don't think anyone speaks Sanskrit anymore. At least, I mean, you can find in religious texts, Hindu religious texts and all that, but it's not really spoken in everyday life. Yeah.
I heard that there's a couple of villages that still use Sanskrit as their main language, and as well that there are some efforts put into reviving the language by the governments. I don't know if that is true, but yeah, it seems like it's not as Latin, which is a completely dead language, but it's definitely being used much less than in the distant past.
Yeah. I don't know if it's still being used. I don't know about that, but I do consider Sanskrit a dead language, as in it's not changing anymore. Linguistically speaking, if a language stops changing or evolving, then it's a dead language. So Sanskrit is now frozen in religious texts and classical texts. So people do still study Sanskrit. People do even do degrees in Sanskrit, but I don't know if people still use it in day to day life. Yeah.
Well, I am not an authority to comment on that. I just can parrot what I have
Mm-hmm.
read
Mm-hmm.
in some replies. But yeah, so that's the situation of Sanskrit at the moment. So
Mm-hmm.
it seems like there are definitely these kind of bigger languages or the languages that more people speak, like let's
Mm-hmm.
say Hindi and Tamil to an extent, maybe Sanskrit, but not anymore. And interestingly, English is the language that is neutral at the moment, at least. But
Yeah, from my perspective, at least, I don't think a lot of people will agree with that.
but it's an easy language that many
Mhm.
people can actually learn and understand, and it helps to just kind of communicate between different kind of groups of people. Because for a Garo person to learn Malayalam and vice versa, I think it would be much more difficult than for both to communicate in English. So in a way, it's a good thing. Although, of course, not many people would agree with that. But the English spoken in India is quite different from, let's say, English spoken in the UK or the US or Australia or New Zealand. I wouldn't call that there's an Indian accent. It feels more like there's an Indian dialect. So
Mhm.
it over time it kind of became a branch of the English language.
Wow.
So how different is it? And could we actually call it a dialect in the current era?
Um, I would say second language studies would consider it a second language dialect or unstable dialect to some extent because it tends to change and vary depending on the person, depending on the individual or a group of people in India. Um, but there are a lot of phrases, a lot of words that are used in India, which are not used in other countries like the UK or the US. And I teach in an American school, so when Americans come to my school, they're quite surprised or they find it funny to hear those words or those phrases being spoken by many Indian people here.
So how come? Why do they find it funny?
I think I kind of empathize or I kind of understand where they're coming from, why they find it funny. It's not necessarily because of accent, but my own language has a lot of dialects and there's a
Mhm.
lot of dialectal differences. And when I hear certain words being used, being spoken by certain people, I don't know. I think it's the strangeness of it that brings about that comedic effect for some reason. Um, I think strangeness can be funny sometimes. I think, and it's not necessarily condescending. I don't want to take it that way, but I think everyone has that. I'm trying to put myself in their shoes, and if I were to think about my own mother tongue, Garo, and people from another region speaking my language, it just sounds funny because I'm not used to hearing it in that way, but I do understand completely what they're saying. It just
Yeah.
doesn't sound familiar in some way. So I think they have that.
Well, I get you because a Lithuanian trying to, let's say, speak British would sound also a little bit funny because it might sound forced. and that which is forced also brings this kind of comedic effect. And also the same as when a person tries to learn Lithuanian. Let's say an American is learning Lithuanian, you do hear some differences phonetically, but most of the time, at least for me, it's actually very pleasant. I really like accents.
Mm.
As long as you can understand what the other person
Yeah.
is saying, accents are actually quite interesting, and I think it also brings the language to life because you get different flavors of the same thing.
Yeah.
Like if you only had like one kind of ice cream, and if it's mint, and let's say many people don't like mints, well, that would suck. But if you can choose, yeah, it makes your life happier. And coming back to your native language, how many speakers are there?
If I were to total it up, I think might be around 500,000. I think
500,000.
speakers altogether. I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about not just people in Garo Hills, but I'm just thinking of people, my people in Bangladesh, or my people in Tripura, or my people in Burma. Um, of course, they
Mm-hmm.
speak my language a little differently. Like I said, different
Sure.
dialect, different variety of the same language. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when the group is scattered around the region, and one part of the group is inside one country, another part of the group is inside of the other country. But of course, like national borders are not drawn most of the time to represent ethnicities to like 100%. They're drawn on various other kind of circumstances. So that's kind of understandable. But from what I know, also the region where you live now, where mainly a lot of Garo people live as well, was not
mhm.
always part of India. So what was it before it became part of northern India?
I was trying to find some information about that, and I just found out that there aren't any records before the British colonial era. I think the whole of Northeast, more or less, was part of the Bengal province during the British era, and then it became part of the Assam province, and then slowly, the current 7, 8 states that we have in the Northeast India got their statehood over time in the 20th century. So that's how it happened. But we don't have a lot of detailed records about how things came to be, how people got to the states, got to that region of India, got to that region of the world.
Hmm.
There's not many records about that. Although each tribe or each people group would have their own oral tradition as to where they came from. For example, my people say that we come from Tibet. Well, I was reading up on it a little bit, and may not happen that we came from Tibet. We may have passed uh, through the region of Tibet. So,
Well, yeah, those are the complexities when you come to think about ethnographic knowledge, because most of the tales or the stories or the histories or the myths on the past, you cannot really check them. And that's also one problem with history as a subject altogether, because, okay, maybe there are some written files about a certain event in the past. Who knows if the person writing those kind of files was honest and not leaning to one or another kind of political circumstance, or it's a very complicated subject. I think one guy, his name is Timothy Snyder. He did a very good lecture series on the history of Ukraine in the Yale University, and he kind of separated national stories or national myths from history.
mm,
So, like, one thing is fairly objective, as events have happened, where another one is like a narrative, a story, how things have happened.
mhm.
So, it's very hard to trace and also to separate the two. But when I come to think about India and Indian history, it doesn't seem like there were so many historical records, or like it doesn't seem like you guys have kept the chronicles like the Chinese did. So you were not that keen on recording every single event in general.
Not my people, because we didn't have um, a written script.
Hmm.
Although there's also another oral tradition about how we lost that. But I'm not going to get into that. But I think this part of India where I'm teaching right now, North India and South India, the Dravidian people and the North Indian people, they have detailed records since Vedic times and all of that. So they kind of know where they came from. They kind of know how they evolved and how their culture evolved, how their languages evolved. So they have those traditions. Yeah.
So even after the Vedas and the Upanishads, it kind of continued to be recording.
Yeah. And I don't think Hindi is. I think Hindi is well documented, for example, and I think you can trace it back all the way to Sanskrit if you were to read some linguistic literatures. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And knowing the colorfulness and the diversity of the Indian region, and from what I understand, it's more or less like a federal state, if I'm correct. Is
Yes,
it?
more or less. Yeah.
So that's the interesting part of the more or less. so,
Uh,
so,
yeah.
so
Mhm.
how is it?
I'm still trying. I'm personally still trying to understand like the political scenario in India. For instance, like you said, I shouldn't have said more or less. I think it is um, more like a federal constitution. I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying that. So each state can have their own, let's say, official language or languages, own constitution, but we also have the central one. So
Mhm.
yeah, which is executed by the central government of India.
Is everything kind of calm and laid back when it comes to different kind of states, or are there some tensions happening inside of India?
Internal tensions, ethnic tensions, linguistic tensions. I mean, even back in my region, Northeast India, it's not just at the center, but also in the states, we do have ethnic tension because uh, even a state like mine, even a small state like mine, Meghalaya, we've got many different ethnic groups, many different languages, not just Garo, not just Khasi.
Okay, so India does definitely seem like a very interesting region. But let's go back to you as a person instead of the entire nation and the entire world, and let's speak a little bit about your profession as a teacher. Because because working as a teacher, I can empathize because I'm also an English teacher. I also teach Lithuanian, but the main part of my work is well, it's connected with teaching English. And being a teacher in different countries is definitely a different experience. So let's say being a teacher in the, we can say in the US, in Lithuania, and in India would be somewhat similar, but also very different. So how is it? How does it feel to be a teacher in India?
Teaching back home, where I come from, and teaching here, two very different contexts, I would say. When I say here, I'm talking about my school
Mhm.
um, in particular. It's a liberal school. Um, it's an American school, so the context is a little bit different from the schools I used to teach back home, where it's more traditional. Um, students tend to obey the rules. Um, I'm not necessarily speaking about how they did academically, um, but back home, I did not have to deal with discipline as much in the sense that it was just expected of them to act in a certain way, to behave in a certain way, and that was fine. But here, I feel like when it comes to value education, uh, I really have to teach the kids. I'm not talking in terms of discipline, but just in terms of, hey, this is perhaps maybe you might want to choose this way instead of that. Giving them options, but also directing them in the right way can be a little
Mhm.
bit complicated sometimes in that sense. Um, but I've grown a lot as a teacher, teaching in very different contexts, in a traditional context, in a more liberal context. Um, and I've decided that I'm somewhere in between. Actually, I don't necessarily completely agree with where the modern education is taking the next generation, but I also don't want to look back into the past and say that that was completely okay. I'd be somewhere in the middle. I think we can learn from both the past and the present, and hopefully we can guide the future generation accordingly.
So that's interesting. When you think about where the modern education is heading,
Mm.
where do you think it's heading?
I'm speaking from the perspective of my current school. I feel like there's that idea that, hey, so let the child decide for himself or herself how they should act. But I like to think of myself as a child. I'm like, would I have known how to act as a child? I think that that's a
Yeah.
little bit extreme of modern education. I'm like, we actually need. I'm like, why are we in school if we're not going to teach them if they can act on their own? It's like, look, I'm a literature. I was a literature student, and I'm a literature teacher, and one of the novels I tend to go back to is Lord of the Flies, where the kids try to create their own system um, when they're stranded on an island, right? So it reminds me of that when we let the children decide for themselves what is right and wrong. I don't think they always know. I think sometimes we might need to guide them. I feel like modern education might be going a little extreme towards that side of like, yeah, let them decide for themselves. But I'm like, yeah, but maybe sometimes we might need to like tell them directly what's right and what's wrong. I mean, we don't want them to choose something terrible. But I'm not by that I'm not condoning like that control that the traditional education had. I think, like I said before, I'm somewhere in between when it comes to educational philosophy.
Well, unfortunately, like when we think about how people think and make decisions,
Mm-hmm.
when we think about an individual on individual level,
Mm-hmm.
we can take into many kind of different aspects and think about how it's better to do a certain thing. But when we think about a larger kind of a domain, let's say public education or something like that, it's not as easy to be detailed. So you more or less start thinking in black and white kind of terms because
Mm-hmm.
it's just easier.
Mm-hmm.
So I that's I think one of the reasons why it's either okay, we're doing it like very strictly,
Mm-hmm.
like the teacher is the authority, the student is the follower,
Mm-hmm.
the students listen to their teachers, the teachers are absolute
Yeah,
gods and they
that's
know
the
everything.
traditional. That's the traditional way. Yeah, I
Whereas on the
always
other one,
yeah. On the other one, maybe I wouldn't say all schools do that. I shouldn't accuse all schools of doing that. But there are schools who would be like, yeah, let the child decide for himself or herself. Like maybe that's a little too extreme. I think I would say the other extreme. Um, I do believe in some objective good and bad because without
sure.
that, like, how do we know what is good and what is bad, right? So, I personally have been struggling for the past 3 4 years in regard to this, and maybe it's not every school, but there are some liberal schools that I've come across that go to the extreme of like let them decide for themselves. Like, yeah, sometimes maybe we might need to say what is the objective good and bad in that situation because otherwise, how would they even know? You know, like,
Well,
um, yeah, I know I sound a little conservative when I say this, but I think I'm
no,
somewhere
you
in
don't.
between.
You sound like you have common sense, which is
Yeah.
different in this kind of regard because, well, many people don't even believe that there's anything objective in general.
Mm,
Everyone, well, the current climates of intellectual thought is leaning more towards that everything is subjective and that's why everything is true. Whereas
yeah.
there's
Mm,
nothing objective and that there's an objective truth is only your truth. And in this kind of situation, it kind of invites like chaos in certain regards
yeah. I
because
think yeah.
there's no way how to monitor what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's
Yeah.
going the
Yeah.
right way and what's going the wrong way. It's just like
Mhm.
it's like utter chaos.
Yeah.
And you know you cannot go to that extreme and you cannot go to the strict dominant order
Mm,
extreme where everything is governed by one idea of reality and everyone has to obey. But as I've mentioned before, probably for some people, it's very hard to understand that it doesn't have to be like that or like that. There's
Mm,
like an infinitude of possibilities somewhere in between. And when you think about even different kind of religious thoughts like Taoism, it's always
mm,
trying to find a balance, or even
mhm.
Buddhism, the middle way, right?
Yeah,
So you want, and
the
it's
middle.
it's not, and you cannot really put it on paper because it's more complex than just like
It
logical
is.
thoughts. So it's more based on feeling and
Mm-hmm.
understanding of the situation, how you should act as a
Mm-hmm.
teacher or as a student. And I think that's the beauty of teachers, that they should understand how to act and
Mm-hmm.
be agile and able to adapt to situations, and but also guide other people so they would be also agile and could adapt to
Mm-hmm.
situations.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. True.
yeah, if I had a classroom with 30 students who would do whatever they want,
Mm-hmm.
like imagine the situation. So you
Oh
should
God.
give them some freedom, but you
Mm-hmm.
also, in that freedom, you should also be like, yeah, but I'm here, the adult with experience, and I kind of have seen what works
Yeah.
and what doesn't. So
Yeah.
you have your own freedom and
Mm-hmm.
subjective understanding, but also like let's tilt it a little bit. So you're like guiding them
Mm-hmm.
instead of ordering them. So you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of acting as a guide, which is,
Yeah.
I think it's a good position to stand in.
Yeah. And I think that's the middle path is in like guiding them, providing rationale for why something is good and something is bad, and not dictatorial like the traditional way. But I also don't want to go to the extreme. Uh, the liberals isn't like, hey, just do whatever you want, you know? No, actually, let's think about this. Let's talk about why this may affect you and affect other people. And I do like to respect individuality because I like being an individual myself, but I also understand as human beings, we are social beings, you know, and our actions impact other people. And I think it's very important for students to understand that. Yes, you have your opinions, and I'm happy that you have them, but you also have to understand how your opinions or your speech or your actions might impact another person. Yeah, so I think that's for me is the middle path. I think.
Well, and that then you actually, you kind of explain that, you have choices, but you also have responsibilities. So
Yeah, it's
so
important.
it's not like you just do whatever you want,
Mhm.
because hey, life is not just about you, and
Yeah.
everyone should understand that, whether it's an adult or a kid, that like the entire existence is not just about you, and the external world is not just your toys. It's like
Mhm.
also, it's also entities that have their own life and decisions and their own internal realities, and you have to respect that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's the danger of the
Yeah.
extreme liberal way, that when you teach the kids that it's only you, it's in all your decisions, and it's only your desires, well, then you think that you're the only one existing.
Yeah.
So, and that's
I
that's
agree.
that's dangerous. That's dangerous. That's very dangerous. Well, anyways, and from what I know, you have mainly worked in private schools. So am I correct?
Yes, you're correct.
So, how is the public education system in India? Is there a big difference between private and public schools?
I'm only speaking from my experience. I think there
Hmm.
is a huge difference. Um, Private schools are more structured in many ways. They have better infrastructure for the most part, and you get quality education in private schools. I'm not saying you cannot get that in government schools, but it does depend. And I have seen a lot of government schools not providing quality education, but I've also seen a few, um, in my experience so far, government schools that provide quality education to kids. Um, I think it does. Look, I think that the thing is, the government schools tend to have um, better teachers in some ways, just
Hmm.
because um, in government schools you are paid better, and that
Hmm.
goes to government or state or central universities as well, which are government, run schools, colleges. Um, but I think in terms of K to 12 schools, I would say private schools are still better just because of that kind of structure that they have. In government schools, I feel like there's that, hey, you don't go to school, nothing's going to happen kind of a thing. And I'm not saying all government schools, I don't want people to misunderstand me, but the schools that I have seen, especially in rural areas, that tends to happen a lot. Like maybe a teacher may be good and teacher may be paid a lot, but a teacher may not even turn up to teach in that school, so which is unfortunate. So that happens a lot in rural areas, and fortunately for people living in urban areas, they have better educational opportunities. So
When you say don't turn up to work, do you mean they just don't come to teach and not inform about
like I said
that?
before, it's only from my experience. I have seen teachers like who work in government schools in rural areas. Not all, like I said before, not all. There are exceptions. Um, who will show up to work maybe once or twice a week, but they won't go the rest of the week.
Holy crap, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I feel sad about it because I do care about education a lot. Um, yeah, and unfortunately, those children in rural areas, they are not able to um, get good opportunities because of that. You know, so.
Hmm.
Mm.
Well, I also, well, both of us are teachers. It's we're kind of biased, but definitely education is important.
Yes.
So that's for sure. But it surprised me when you have said that public schools are better paid. Well, teachers are paid better in public schools than in private. Of course, not always, but in
There are
general,
exceptions.
because
In general.
because in Lithuania, let's say at least a few years ago, it was the other way around. And many teachers from public schools, well, they just quit their job and go work in private, work as tutors, or just change professions. And currently, we're in a very bad situation educationally because many teachers decided to stop working. And let's say I teach online. I work as a private tutor now as well. And one of my students, he's an eighth grader, and he says that, well, he hasn't yet had any English classes from September because they can't find an English teacher. And there are a lot of English teachers, but if you think about physics or mathematics, sometimes it's even worse. And one of the main problems and why people go on strike, teachers, why they go on strike or they quit jobs is, well, low pay, because it kind of shows that the government doesn't care.
Mm.
So if you value your teachers, you pay them well, which I think if that is the situation in India, Indian government is doing a good job of in this regard at least.
Yeah.
But
Well,
but at back home, it's a little bit different. So
I
um,
can't speak for all states, but yeah, in my state, I found that. But there are private schools that get some amount of funding from the government, which may not be consistent or which may be unfairly done, and does
mhm,
happen.
mhm,
In private schools, they get some funding from the government, and the teachers are supposed to be paid a lot more than what they're getting,
mhm,
but they're not getting that, and as a result, they go on strikes, like you said. Yeah, so there's that. But there's an exception with private schools, though. International schools pay well.
mhm,
So if you are fortunate enough to get into an international school in India, they pay well. I'm not saying um, in comparison to other international schools in other countries, but I'm just saying within India, I would
mhm,
say international schools pay the best. and then government schools, and then private schools, which are national schools, but not international. Yeah.
Yeah, because even here where I live in Madeira, private school, even the word associates itself with the word prestige.
Mm,
Same in Lithuania. So if you're sending your kids into a private school, it means you're also paying for the studies, and it kind of brings prestige to your family, and you expect better education for your children. So, it's interesting that in some ways in India it's a little bit different,
mm,
but of course not totally. So when you think about the Indian education system in general,
mm,
uh, where do you think it's at? Is it going the right way, or it could do with some improvements? Like for you as a teacher yourself,
mm.
because you're actually in the classroom, and you are
Yeah.
the one that does the teaching. So does the guidelines of how you should do your work actually make sense, or maybe they are not as
Um,
strict and they don't impact you?
it doesn't really impact me currently because I teach in an international school, which does not follow the Indian education system. Um, but having come from an Indian education system, I do know the flaws in the system. On paper, the educational philosophy, everything sounds amazing, but I think India is struggling to move away from the traditional methods and approaches, which is actually preventing um, the students from growing, developing. Um, it's a lot of rote memorization, rote learning still in a lot. I'm not saying all, but in a lot of Indian schools. And I think there are good private schools in India, not international ones, but national private
Mhm.
schools. They are moving away from that, and they're doing pretty well in terms of experiential learning, in terms of getting students to think critically. Um, all of that, they're moving away from rote memorization. And I'm not in any way degrading memorization. I'm just saying that there are other ways to be learning,
Sure.
and not just one way. And one way might work for one student, but there are many ways that we can present to students. Mhm.
And Tasal, because I feel like we already have been speaking about many things, and I want to respect your time, so I'll actually move on to the last part of
Mhm.
the episode.
Sure.
And I want to ask you, what are your plans for the future? Like knowing where you are at now, where would you like to be in a year?
I'm at crossroads right now. I'd like to teach abroad,
Hmm.
but this is where the issue comes in. I'm an English teacher from India. Usually people don't, there's a stigma attached to
Hmm.
English teachers from India. They just assume that you can't teach English just because you're not from one of the, seven native speaking countries or whatever they call them.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
that's the unfortunate thing about English teaching. Part of me regrets it, but part of me feels like this is what I wanted to do and I'm doing it.
Hmm.
I do want to teach abroad. Maybe eventually become a teacher trainer even, because I've had really
Okay.
bad experiences in teacher training institutions. And
Hmm.
to be honest, I did drop out of a teacher training institution when I first started teaching, just because I was like, I don't agree with how you're doing it and the reasons, your rationale, everything. So I can be a little rebellious that way. But I think, I don't know, I'm not as idealistic as I was when I first started teaching. But at the same
Hmm.
time, I do want to have a hand in preparing the next generation for a better world, for a better future. And I feel like education could be one of the ways to do that. And to get
Yeah.
into teacher training would be great. I still have to figure out how I'll get there. But yeah, so my plans would be, I don't know, teaching abroad, uh, and also maybe becoming a teacher trainer in the near future. So,
Cool. Cool. And would you like to become a teacher trainer in one of the common like TEFL, CELTA, TESOL kind of institutions? Or
I
do you
mean,
have some other ideas in mind if it's not too private?
uh, you know, I used to think that I only wanted to do that, right? Like training
Yeah.
teachers to become uh, teachers of English as a foreign language. But I've
Hmm.
kind of started enjoying general education as well, and education more
Hmm.
holistically. And I wouldn't mind becoming a teacher trainer in a general education setting and not just TEFL or TESOL or yeah, one of those. Um, but I don't mind. I don't mind either way. Like I don't mind getting started in TEFL, but maybe gradually move into general education teacher training as well. So
So when you think about general education and when you think about an educated person, like how do you imagine an educated person? Like what kind of qualities does the person have? What
um,
kind of knowledge does the person have? How would you describe an educated person that you would like to help create?
uh, I don't think I can create an educated person by training teachers or by teaching students in schools. To me, an educated person is a person of wisdom, a person of life experience, a person with empathy. I feel like without those human qualities, things that make you humane, things that make a difference in someone's life, I don't think you're educated. I mean, you can have 10 PhDs, but I think without that kind of wisdom to use knowledge to make a difference in people's lives, including your own, I don't think you're an educated person. Um, so yeah, so for me, I don't want to degrade anyone. Let's say someone who's just graduated high school, does not have any degree, but he or she is um, making a livelihood, an honest livelihood with their own hands. I think I respect them so much. I don't think I could have done that, but they are educated in their field because of their experience, because of their wisdom in that field, And I don't necessarily see formal education as contributing, as being the main contribution to um, someone's education, but it's a part of that. I can see it being a part of that, but I don't think it's what makes someone an educated person. So that's my philosophy, I would say.
Okay, very good, very nice. And if we take three adjectives, educated, smart, and wise, what do you think is the difference between these three adjectives for you? How would you describe every single person? And which would you prefer?
I would prefer wise, if I may speak about preference first.
Hmm.
Um, I'd like to be a wise person. I don't think I always am, to be honest. It takes a lot of courage to be a wise person. It doesn't only take experience. I think it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of humility to be a wise person. Um, smart, smart is, I think, for me, it's just being sharp. Like you
Yeah.
can think on your feet. You're able to say quickly, maybe use a little bit of wit. That would be smart for me. And knowledgeable definitely
Hmm.
comes under smart as well. A wise
Hmm.
person may not necessarily be knowledgeable about everything, but because of their life perspective, they're able to still access any kind of knowledge that is
Hmm.
presented to them. And the other one was educated, right? I would
Hmm.
say a wise person is an educated person. I would use those two
Hmm.
synonymously. And I
Hmm.
wouldn't say a knowledgeable person is educated. There are some aspects of education in them, but I wouldn't say they're
Hmm.
an educated person. So that would be my response.
Right. Good answer. Very good answer. And what do you think? we kind of know how to reach the level of educated in some ways, at
Mhm,
least in my mind. I think
mhm,
mainly like how I imagine an educated person is like a person that has just acquired a lot of knowledge in terms of the world and has manners also. So it's more to do with acquisition, like what you
mhm.
acquire throughout life and
Acquiring knowledge, yeah.
throughout your education, for formal or informal. A
Mhm,
smart person, as you have said, is more to do with sharpness and thinking quick on your feet. Also, it kind of transcends the good and bad, because a smart people can be a very good person or a very bad person. You know,
yeah,
so
yeah, true.
it's more like just being sharp as a knife. You know, you can do good
Yeah.
things with knives and
Mhm.
you can do bad ones. Whereas wise is like it's the most abstract, because
It is so abstract, yeah.
to do it's more to do with your like perspective and understanding of the world,
Mhm,
understanding other people, having empathy, and just kind of having an innate feeling of how the world is, how you are, and how do these two things come together in like a moment to moment basis. This is like what I imagine when I hear the word wise. And but I do not know how to help people to
mhm,
go this path towards wisdom. And do
mhm.
you think that all people actually should go this path? Are all people meant to go this path? Or, it doesn't require for everyone to be wise?
I think people should aim to be wise. I don't think there is one way to teach someone to be wise. You can definitely impart some wisdom, um, to your students. Um, but at the end of the day, I think wisdom is a personal journey as well. And like I said before, I think one requirement to be wise would be humility, which is really difficult to achieve. um, yeah, and I'm saying that about myself as well.
Hmm.
And I
I
think
understand.
sometimes in terms of when you acquire a lot of knowledge, actually that prevents you from becoming wise, because you become arrogant, you become proud, you become, I would say, too caught up in your own knowledge that you forget to use it to apply that knowledge. And I don't think there's one way, if I may say it succinctly. There's no
Hmm.
one way. I think it's a personal journey, and I think it requires a lot of humility. But I think everyone should aim for wisdom, because it is a lack of wisdom right now that's causing all of this conflict in the world. A lot of, yeah, hurtful things being said because of the lack of wisdom.
Yeah, but it does feel like certain people just don't give a damn about wisdom, and
No, I
that's
don't.
not their
Yeah,
goal in life.
yeah, and I think it also is wise to understand that as well. Not everyone will attain that, and not everyone will aim for that, and not everyone will take that seriously. Forget about wisdom. They might not even take knowledge seriously. They might not even knowledge acquisition seriously, right? There will be a lot of people like that. And I think
Hmm.
um, one of the things about wisdom that I've been learning myself is that sometimes you just need to understand human nature. And sometimes people may not act the way you want them to. And I think that has been really helpful for me as a teacher, just because it's like, I know that this student definitely does not want to listen about this one.
Hmm.
Okay, so I will direct him in another way, or I will let natural consequences teach him the lesson. Sometimes wisdom means you just have to
Hmm.
let go, not in a not in a manner
Hmm.
that you don't care about the person. It's just sometimes you need to know the
Hmm.
limit. I think that is also a part of being wise, I think. And I'm not saying I'm wise at all. I am not, and I really would like to be wiser.
Uh, have you ever seen a movie by the Korean cinematographer Kim Ki-duk? I think it's called Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring Again.
No, what's that about?
It's exactly about this, what you have just said about wisdom, about natural consequences, and about mentoring in a way where you're not like a strict teacher, but you're more like, like an invisible hand in
Mm,
some
mm.
ways. So it's a very, very nice movie. And when I was listening to you, I kind of remember
Mm,
this. So
mm.
you might actually enjoy that.
Oh,
It's a
check
good
that
one.
out. What's it called
Uh,
again? What's the name of
yeah,
the
I'll give
movie?
you.
Okay, you can text me.
It's called It's called Spring, Summer, Fall, and Winter, and Spring Again,
Oh, oh.
which I will forward to you afterwards.
Mm,
So it's
mm,
a great one.
mm.
So yeah, I think this is a very good place to actually wrap up our conversation. And I do. I'm happy that we're actually connected on certain parts, even speaking about the distinction between education and wisdom, because in my mind, teachers shouldn't just educate the subjects, but they should also help people to guide them towards wisdom, whatever wisdom is for those people, because it doesn't seem like wisdom is just one singular thing. It's actually a diverse, it has many forms, so to say. Just like there are many colors in the planet, there's many shades of wisdom. So to help to recognize their own shade and like get there, I think that's what the best what we can do. So I'm really happy that we connected over this topic as well, and I hope we will continue helping people to do that.
Yeah, I'll try my best.
I'll try as well. It's hard. Most of the time, I fall short,
Yeah, I think it's good to recognize your flaws as well, and just to understand that you're also a human being. I think,
which is also part of wisdom. Once again.
yeah, I think so.
so anyways, Tasal, thanks for joining in today. It was lovely to have you. Very interesting to learn about you as a person, about you as a teacher, about you as a person from the Garo people, about India, in many different kind of layers. It was a great conversation. Thanks for joining in today.
Yeah, thank you, Paulus. Yeah.
Yeah, and until next time.